Welcome to the Governor's Crime Commission Grant Opening Process Training. At the completion of this module, you will understand issues surrounding the opening of your grant. This includes subrecipient documentation, which is required prior to the grant opening. Additionally, you will be able to explain the organizational roles. And lastly, this training will equip you to submit a Notice of Grant Implementation via the Grant Enterprise Management System, GEMS. Once you've returned your signed grant package to the Governor's Crime Commission, the grant opening process can begin. This process is handled by your GCC grant manager. The grant opening process ensures that required documentation has been included in your submission. Key subrecipient personnel have been assigned to the appropriate organizational roles, and implementation plans are in place to successfully administer the grant funds you have been awarded. Now we will further explore each of these grant opening components. Let's begin with required documentation. Your grant manager will check to make sure all required documentation is included in GEMS, the Grant Enterprise Management System. The award package and modification letter detail the documentation required for grant openings. These documents should be signed and uploaded to the project documents in GEMS. This documentation includes grant award, modifications form, certification regarding lobbying, debarment, and suspension, Equal Employment Opportunity Plan certification, GCC Civil Rights Compliance Checklist, GCC Civil Rights Compliance Self-Certification for Grantees, GCC Subrecipient Single Audit Certification Form, NCID Acceptable Use Policy. Next, we will look at organizational policies that fall under the category of required documentation. Each GCC subrecipient is also required to upload the following organizational policies to the Project Documents section of GEMS. Procurement and Purchasing Policy, the guidelines and policies your organization follows when making purchases. Conflict of Interest Policy. The intent of this check is to make sure your organization has a plan to handle situations where there is an actual or implied conflict of interest between an officer or director and any vendor you are considering doing business with. Unlawful Discrimination Policy. Your organization's policy on prohibiting discriminatory practices. Whistleblower Policy. This policy encourages staff and volunteers to come forward with credible information on illegal practices or violations of adopted policies of the organization and specifies that the organization will protect the individual from retaliation. Please refer to your grant award package for additional documentation that may be required. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your grant manager. Continuing with the grant opening process, let's explore the organizational roles. Assigning organizational roles is another part of the grant opening process. Each GCC subrecipient should assign key personnel in order to make sure grant funds are administered properly. Authorizing Official, signatory to grant award, ultimate point of oversight for the project. The Financial Officer provides financial oversight to the project. They are an agency financial policy and procedure expert and a federal financial policies and procedures expert. The project director is the signatory to the grant award, responsible for execution of the project, and the primary point of contact with GCC. The organization administrator submits all SAM updates to GEMS, approves all requests for organizational roles, assigns the AO, FO, and PD to open projects, approves and denies requests for project access, and deactivates access and roles if needed. The project editor is an optional role and has access to project details, updates the budget adjustments, and can create and submit subrecipients. Throughout the life of your GCC grant, you may need to change or update your organizational role assignments. The first step in this process is to notify your GCC grant manager by letter on organizational letterhead explaining the reason for the change. Once you have approval for this request, your new contacts will need to get a valid NCID and access GEMS to start their assignment process. Once in GEMS, the first step is for the new contact to associate themselves with your organization and request an organizational role. This is done under the GEMS profile. All GCC subrecipients are populated in the Organization drop-down menu. Please review this list carefully to find your organization and only use the green Add Organization button as a last resort. The next step is for the new contact to request an organizational role in GEMS. This is done from the profile under the Request Organizational Roles section, located on the left-hand menu. Here, they will select which organizational role they are requesting. Also, a justification must be provided for the request. Once the blue Submit Request button is pressed, it will have to be approved by the organizational administrator. The organizational administrator will visit the Assign Officials section of their GEMS profile to approve the request. Continuing with the grant opening process, let's explore the implementation plan. The final step in the opening process is for the subrecipient project director to submit a Notice of Grant Implementation to GCC for review. This is done before any grant activity is started. The Notice of Grant Implementation is a short narrative of how grant funds will be implemented. It explains the steps your organization will take to ensure the project is administered according to federal and state regulations. Please be sure to include details on procurement, documentation, and financial reporting. To submit a Notice of Grant Implementation, log into GEMS and navigate to the current project. Select Notice of Implementation from the left-hand menu. Select the activities that represent implementation measures. Describe the implementation measures in a narrative form. Please note the limit is 3,900 characters. Once the submission is ready, select the blue Save button. This will be sent to your GCC Grant Manager for review. You will receive confirmation once the submission is reviewed and approved. This concludes the grant opening process training. This course covered the required documentation, organizational roles, and grant implementation plan that are part of opening your GCC grant. Each section highlights the use of GEMS. If you have additional questions regarding the opening of your GCC grant, please feel free to contact your GCC Grant Manager. Their contact information can be found in the Project Overview sections of GEMS. Congratulations, you may proceed to the next module.